Hello everyone, welcome to this lesson. My name is Edmond Kojefosu, and in this video, we are beginning our discussion on Introduction to Political Economy and Africa's Development. This is part one of what we'll be doing of 8 sessions, and the aim is to build a strong foundation for the rest of the course that we'll be looking at and treating. I'll kindly admonish you that if you've not subscribed to our video, kindly click on the subscribe button and also like our videos and leave your comment and also let's know your feedback. As I said, this is the first part and the aim is to help build a strong foundation for the rest of the course, as I said earlier. And I want this lesson to be simple as possible, clear and practical, so that you'll be able to understand it better and have the meaning of what we are doing in relation to this particular topic or course. If you are exploring this particular concept for the first time, I'll say this is the best video for you to look at because we are making it as simple as possible so that even if you're a first timer coming across this concept, it becomes easy for you to grasp, understand better. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what political economy means, describe the idea of development and underdevelopment, and identify some of the main challenges that has plagued Africa or Africa is facing since independence. Our focus in this particular lesson is that we are focusing on 3 major things. First, the meaning and the scope of political economy. Second, development and underdevelopment. And the last one will be Africa's development challenges since independence. So as we go through the slides, keep one question in mind. Why has development in Africa been so difficult, uneven, and contested even after independence? Because this particular question sits at the heart of political economy. To our next slides, here is our roadmap for the lesson. We begin with political economy, where we focus on power, interest, institutions, the ways that we can make decisions. Then we move to development, where we can go beyond just GDP and ask, what does real progress mean in people's life? Finally, look at Africa since independent. You can think of this lesson in a simple way, which is political economy gives us the lens, development gives us the goal, whilst Africa's post-independent experiences gives us the real world cases we are trying to understand. So the lens, the goal, and the real cases we are trying to understand. You also see 3 discussions on the slides, and those discussions that I want you to ponder over or think over for just some few seconds as we carry on, which is who benefits from policies and who loses? What counts as progress in the real world? And what are some problems that persist after independence? Those questions will guide our thinking all throughout this course. So ponder over them and think over them as we take time and do this 8-part series on this particular topic. In this particular slice, we are trying to understand what exactly is political economy. Political economy is the study of how politics and economics shape each other, right? So it helps us understand how power works, how interests are protected, how institutions operate, and how decisions affect the distribution of wealth, opportunity, and development outcome. So the simple kind of memory aid on the slides that I can give is politics asks who has power. We ponder or we wonder who has the power, right? The economy asks who gets resources. And then how does power influence who gets those resources? So who has the power in this instance? Maybe, for example, taking Ghana, who has the power? Um, you have the government in place, which is the National Democratic Congress, led by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. They have the power. Who gets the resources? At the end of the day, they will decide who is getting the resources, which regions are getting the roads, which regions are getting the educational systems. The same thing will apply, and I was like, how power what decides resource outcome. That is what we are referring to. The same thing will be replicated in having that of what the United States, that of also what of Nigeria, Ethiopia, where you find that the one who has power decide who is getting the resources. But in political economy, we seek to get to understand how one way or the other the politics has its own way of influencing the economy and how the economy influences the politics. So sometimes you realize that political decisions can have a bearing on the economy. So a political decision where the government decides to influence the governor to print more currencies into the system can lead to what? Inflation, a higher inflation. That is what how we've seen a political decision having what an impact what on the economy, right? Also having to understand how inflation is rising or how a country's currency is depreciating may actually also be a reason why a government may lose political power. So in one breath, you've seen how the politics is actually what affecting the economy and how the economy has a way of also affecting what politics. So imagine a government has enough money to build only two new hospitals this year, right? But five regions are demanding them. So a political economist will not ask only that where are hospitals needed most? No, they will ask who has influence, which group are lobbying, or how is government calculating to make that particular decision. That is political economy because we are linking resources to power and decision making. Another example is fuel prices. When fuel prices rises, the issue is not only economics. It also becomes political because transport workers, traders, students, and governments all have what a different interest in that. Because once you start asking who gains, who loses, and who decides, you are doing political economy. Now to our next slides as we continue with political economy. This slide shows the broad area political economy examines. It looks at the state and policy, institution and governance, markets and structures, and global relations. So when we say the state and policy, it includes taxes, public spending, development planning, and government what regulations. When we say taxes, when government put levies and fees on products, or if you have your pay slip, you may end up seeing that there may be a tax that is there. That is state and what it's part of state and what policies, right? You may see regulations, government having rules in place about certain things and how it should be done, right? Institutions and governance, which includes rules, laws, um, corruption, accountability, and the way the state actually what function. So these rules and regulations, as Larry Diamond say, as the rules of the game, is basically referring to not the buildings you see, but the laws that are known by people, and people know that these are, if you do A, or if you do B, or you do C, these are the end results. And if I want to open a business in this particular republic, what I have to do is that I would have to go through the registrar general. I have to do this. Those are the rules we are talking about. Those are the rules and the laws we are talking about. So those are things that is about institutions and what and governance. So markets and structures include jobs, production, prices, trade, and the structure of what of the economy. So global relations include aid, debt, trade rules, investors, and geopolitical influence. You hear of countries saying their debts, they have this amount of debt, they have to pay all this. Sometimes you hear the discussion around the continent where some African countries may say they are indebted or they have certain debts. So those are part of the global relation because these debts are owned to external what partners who may are not even, some of them are not even found on the continent. Yeah, so debt issues become aid, which come from also external what partners, some from Europe, some from the Americans, some from other places. So those are discussion or part of what the scope of what we talk about when it comes to global relations under political economy. So political economy is not narrow at all. It's not narrow at all. It studies both what happens inside the country and what happens between the country and the wider world. So, for example, Ghana, let's use Ghana's cocoa. So, which, as you can see on the slide over there, right? So, if cocoa prices fall on the world market, right, government revenue also falls. Once that happens, choices about public spending becomes political. Should government cut education spending, road projects, health budget, or borrow money? Each option affects people differently, and different groups will pressure what the state in different way. That is why political economy what matters. You can also think of it this way. If a government says it wants to reduce poverty, the political economic question is not only whether it is a good idea. The real question is who will pay for it, who will implement it, and who may resist it, and who will benefit from it. Those are some of the issues. So you realize that when a country like Ghana, where when they seek to put a new AI system in place at their port to help with some issues, you see certain group also resisting that. Why should they be so? So the question over here is that who is implementing it, who is benefiting from it, and who is going to resist it? That is what we are talking about. And in every time of every country, there have been policies, there have been discussions where you have people who are hailing it, you have people who are resisting it. So all these come into what political what economy. So as we move to the next slides, where we're going to look at development, as we move to the concept of development. And I can say that development is one of the most important ideas in this particular course, and it's often what misunderstood. Many people think development simply means economic growth. So, in plain words, they may feel like it is what? If it's GDP, gross domestic product, when it goes up, they say the country is developed. But that is too narrow. We are not saying it's not part of the development debate or discussion. No. But we are saying it is too narrow because development encompasses that. It goes beyond just the GDP growth or just about GDP discussion. No. We agree that development certainly includes what? Economic growth. But it is more than growth. And in this particular slide, what you see here is that development is economic growth plus structural transformation, which means that the economy is changing in a deeper and more meaningful way. For example, a country should not remain dependent only on what? Gold, cocoa, oil, or coffee forever. No. A developing economy should what? Gradually move into what? Manufacturing, technology, services, processing, innovation, and higher productive what? Sectors. That we mean by what? Structural transformation. And also know that development also means improves living standards. So at the end of the day, if a country says they are developed, and then, for example, let's take a country like Ghana, which is a country I come from. That's why you see me sometimes using examples from there. A country like Ghana, somebody works in this particular country, and then at the end of the day, the person receives 500 Ghana cedis, which is equivalent to $52 a month. Another day, if the person has a child and this is not able to help improve his life, improve his standard of living, his child able to pay rent, get certain basic necessity, that is not development. Because development should include what? Improving living what? Standards. So in simple terms, I mean people's life should actually get better, not worse off. You should have a better job, better roads, better schools, better hospitals, more security, and more opportunities. It is not enough for the economy to grow whilst the ordinary people or the layman still suffer badly or could not even afford 2 square meal a day. That is not development. So I'm reminding you that development includes human development. Andrew Gooder Frank said that it is what? The realization of the human potential. That is when development has taken place, when human beings realize their potentials, that what they intend to achieve or what they intend to become. At the end of the day, if the system in place is able to help them, they are better schools, there are stronger educational systems that are able to help the person. There is job security for their parents. You're able to send them to those advanced schools or whatever they have to do to support their education for them to be able to achieve that particular potential that they have. If it's been a musician, it's been a footballer, if the academic school academy that they can go and play in, if there's a school of music or of performing acts they can actually attend, if he or she wants to be a lawyer, if there are all these things in place that is able to help the person realize that potential, that is development. Because it is not enough for the economy to grow whilst people still suffer. You put that in mind. But that is not what we mean by what? Development. So this means that we must ask questions. And if we're asking questions, we must ask questions like, are children in school? Or do we have children still walking or gallivanting around the streets who are within the ages of 7, 8, 9, 10, who are not in the classroom learning? We should ask ourselves that question. Are people living longer? If you have people who are dying because they go to the hospitals and there are no beds available for them and they are turned away, if people end up being in an ambulance and they are being turned to 4 or 3 different hospitals, those are the things we should ask ourselves. Are maternal death reducing? Are families able to earn enough to live with dignity. So the key point is that development is multidimensional. It is not a one-way process. It's a multidimensional process. It is not one number. It is not just GDP. It is not just foreign investment. It is not just bigger buildings in the capital city like Accra or Lagos or Abuja or Kampala. No. Real development means broad what improvement in people's well-being. Let me give you a stronger example. Imagine a country discover oil, and because of that, the GDP of the country rises quickly for 6 years, right? So on paper, the economy looks successful. But if there is youth unemployment, they have rural roads that are still on tar. The hospitals lack medicine and equipment. University produce graduates without jobs, and they have inequality what still widen. Can we really say that that country is what developed? That's a question you should ask yourself. Can we say that? The honest answer is what? Is no, not fully. We can't say that because we may have what growth here, but not real development. Because the oil is showing growth, but not real development because it is not transforming the lives of the people in that particular way, creating jobs. Let me give you another day-to-day example for you, right? So imagine a family whose income or what they are getting rises, but the children are still out of school. They still live in an unsafe house, and they still cannot what access proper medical care. You will not say that that family is truly doing well just because the income went up, just because maybe they are receiving a pay of maybe they've moved from receiving a pay of $1,000 to a $5,000. No, because even though they may have received the pay of $5,000, the family is not seeing any improvement. The kids are not being able to go to school. They may be wearing tattered clothes. They, when they fall sick, they're not even able to get medicine. You can't say there's that kind of what development in the lives of the people in the family. Because you can't say that they are doing well just because their income have what basically what gone up. Because it is about the condition of life as a whole that you can stand upon to say this is development. This is why I place a mini discussion question that you can discuss among your peers. You can ponder over them, right? And which is if GDP rises but unemployment stays high, is that development? Ponder over that. Think about that. My answer will be that it is actually not going to be the best or enough if that happens. But what will your answer be? Ponder over that. GDP growth what matters, but it is not enough on its own. And I say that we must also ask who benefits from that growth, whether decent jobs are increasing, whether poverty is reducing, and whether the economy is becoming more diverse. So a line you should remember is this: growth is about the size of the economy, but development is about the quality of life of the people. Think about that. In our next slide, now let us look at underdevelopment. Underdevelopment does not simply mean the total absence of development. It refers to a condition in which poverty, dependency, inequality, and a weak productive capacity are produced over time. And it's often because of what? Historical and structural what? Factors. That is why in this particular part of the slice, you have a sense that underdevelopment is shaped by colonial legacy and on equal global relation. So many African economies were designed during colonial rule to export raw materials and import manufactured goods. That when they export the cocoa, then when it's turned into chocolate in Switzerland, then it's shipped back to them. That structure did not disappear automatically at independence. In many cases, it remained. So the image you find on the slides that I put over here is just to give you infrastructure is built mainly to move goods from the interiors or the hinterlands or remote parts of those countries where raw materials were being cultivated or are being harvested or are being mined to the ports. That tells you how the economy was organized. That it was organized for extraction and what? An export, not for what? A balanced national development. And after independence, the countries or the country may still struggle to build a diverse internal economy. Let me make this concrete for you to understand what I mean by this. Suppose a country exports cocoa beans or gold or crude oil, right? But most of the value addition happens outside the country. The raw material will leave the country, profits are made elsewhere, and then the country remain what? Dependent on external markets, foreign exchange, and what? Imported finished goods. That is one way underdevelopment can continue. It becomes a system that has been built there, and they realize that they don't benefit from that chain of value addition, where when you're adding value, it will create job, it will bring foreign exchange, or it will able to let people export from your country, expand industries. They don't have that benefit. So they will continue to have that underdevelopment still persistent. So underdevelopment is not simply about being poor. It is about being what? Locked into a structure that makes transformation difficult. That is why political economy is useful, because it helps us ask how those structures are created, who benefits from them, and why they still persist and why it doesn't change. Now to the slides, which gives us a snapshot of Africa at independence. So economically, many African countries depended heavily on primary commodity export, as I've said earlier. They had weaker industrial bases, they had limited infrastructure, and then they had an outward looking economy. Politically, they were basically what? A newly formed state, because they had gained independence fresh, mostly in the 50s coming, right? Yeah. And then facing national development pressures from citizens, also feel like they have to get jobs, things have to happen for them, and all those stuff. So there was this higher expectation of what? Rapid development. And then competition over what? Scarce what? Resources that were there. So this means that independence brought both hope and difficulties, because citizens expected leaders to deliver jobs. That if you've gotten independence, we have to have jobs. Like the schools have to be there, the roads have to be there, the hospitals have to be there, that there has to be national unity. All these things were things that citizens were expecting. But the leaders inherited economies that were what? Narrow. An economy that was what? Dependent. And an economy that was structurally what? Weak. Think about it. Like you taking over a house, right? That was built mainly to serve someone else's need. The structure is there. You have the house there, but it is not built to support your long-term comfort or progress as you live in that house. You now have to renovate the whole house whilst living in it. That is similar to the challenge many African leaders faced at independence. That living in that same house that was not built for you, you have to live in the same house. Whilst you are living in, you are doing the painting, you are changing everything. Imagine the discomfort, the challenges. So one of the central arguments we will keep returning to is that African states were expected to deliver what? Rapid development, but they began from conditions that made that very difficult for them. And some of the subsequent slides will look at that particular issue and that particular concept very well. To this slide brings together some of the major challenges that have shaped Africa's development since independence. These include political instability, debt and dependency, governance and corruption, and last but not the least, and not limited to only these 4 points, poverty and jobs. Political instability matters because coups, conflicts, and constant legitimate interruptions has actually what truncated long-term planning. When governments change violently or legitimacy is weak, policies often stop, they reverse, or they fail. Before independence, you have the likes of Sergeant Dr. Kwame Nkrumah being out of power in the 1966. We've seen a lot of coups within that particular period. Also, in modern times, you've seen coups having happen in the places of like Burkina Faso, the place like Mali. Places on the African continent have seen what coups, and sometimes when these coups happen, sometimes what you see is that there's this truncation of what of policies of the success or things that have been done, right? So it comes to affect that. That's what we're talking about, the political what instability. It comes to affect that, the coup d'etats, conflict. The lives of Sudan has been plagued with constant conflict over what lands, of resources, over political power, and has become a challenge and has plugged Sudan into more like an anarchistic society. So it becomes a challenge. So that even Africa after independence, these challenges still persist, where these conflicts still persist on the African continent, where coup d'etats are still prevalent on the African continent in some places, which undermines what the long-term planning in these countries. And these violence kind of draw these countries backwards from the success they've already chalked or what they are doing, and truncates some of the developmental projects, ideas that are being carried out over the period. And the second point is dependency and debt. Dependency and debt matters because many African economies still rely heavily on exports of fewer commodities. When I say fewer commodities, maybe you take the likes of Ghana. The major export for the country will be cocoa, will be gold, and currently they also discovered oil. They have oil. You may have the likes of Nigeria, where another primary commodity export will be what? Their oil, right? You may have countries like Uganda, Kenya, where they will look at exporting coffee and other raw materials. These are few. Then these countries are heavy on foreign what loans, loans from the International Monetary Fund, loans from the World Bank, loans from other creditors, and that those external finance. So what this implies or what this means is that when global prices fall or debt repayment rises, governments face severe pressure. For example, in the year 2026, when the world saw a decline in the prices of cocoa, the Ghanaian government then had to rethink about the prices they promised the cocoa farmers to rather give them a price that will be a little bit lesser, because they can't give them the price beyond the world market. That is, so it affects the government's projection of what revenue that they were expecting. So government will then have to rethink some of these things. It puts pressure on governments. In the year 2023, 2024, when the Republic of Ghana had to do a debt exchange program where they had to meet their creditors and then had to negotiate with them and having to amend some of the deadlines for some of their loans. Not only Ghana, the likes of Zambia, Zimbabwe, have all seen some issues of debt payment, restructuring they had to do. And this puts pressure and extra burden on government on the African continent. Governance and corruption. It matters because resources that should support development can be diverted, it can be misused or captured by the elite. When you go to a country like Nigeria, where sometimes it is assumed, and there have been instances where certain people or certain cases have been to court where with certain monies have been versioned to be in the hands of certain few elite people in the society. You come to places like Ghana, where there have been court cases where a certain judge had to say that this particular case that which was filed by former prosecutor Martin Alamisi Amidu, where the court had to describe the situation more like as a create, loot, and share. When some of these issues comes in, when you see in Ghana where the Public Accounts Committee sits down and civil servants, it's not politicians, civil servants come in, and you see the misuse of resources and the embezzlement of resources that has to go to the people and is being used by these civil servants anyhow, or being used by the heads of these directorates anyhow, it is problematic. And last but not the least, or not least only this, poverty and job matters because growth without employment leave many people excluded from the economy. To make this practical, based on even all the examples or scenarios I've spoken about, to make this more practical, a country may have a good development plan on paper, but if it is facing falling commodity prices, rising debt, and a tense political climate, corruption scandals, or higher unemployment, or all these challenges, what happens is that implementation becomes very difficult. This is why political economy matters, because development is never about good policies or good policies ideas or alone. Even though policy ideas are very fundamental to development, it's not only about that or having a good policy ideas. No, and it's also about power, the institution, the incentives, and the capacity. This is why the discussion prompt I put over here on the slides is quite very useful for you, because it helps you to think about that which challenge is more important for Africa today and why. What I may say is that different students may choose different answers, but what matters is the reasoning. You should be able to explain the link between the challenge and the development outcome. Two, our next slide. This slide gives us 4 examples or countries that I use as a case study. These are not the only countries you can find. You can find a lot of countries in the literature to have more examples or talk about. The point here is to show that political economy is not abstract. It's not only just in book in the writing, no, but it can be used to understand real countries and real choices. Ghana helps us to think about cocoa dependency, state-led development, debt and fiscal choices. Nigeria helps us to think about oil wealth, governance problem, and regional competition. Tanzania gives us the example of what the Ujoma, which we'll talk about in the subsequent slide, the Ujoma and the state socialism, which we'll talk about, where the state socialism, where national development and equality were central goals. This is when they gained independent and was led by Nyera, the teacher, which we'll talk about him also in our subsequent slides when we are looking at leaders at independence, which is also be very fascinating. So it gives us a better way to understand this. Wherever I feel like when it comes to Botswana, it's often presented or is often seen as an example of a relative strong institution and more stable resource management. Whenever you study a country and this course, ask these 3 questions. What was the economic structure? What political choices were made? Who benefit and who lost? Let me model this quickly using what I've just recited right here. That in Nigeria, the economic structure was heavily shaped by oil. Political choices about how the oil revenue was distributed became deeply important. Some groups and elites benefited more than others, whilst corruption and regional tension weakened the broader developmental impact. When we take Botswana's two, or let's take Botswana over here, the diamond world could have easily have produced crisis, right? But stronger institutions and a more management would help support long-term stability. That does not mean that Botswana has no problem, but that shows that the institution matters. And these cases reminds us that resources alone do not determine what development. What matter is also what how those resources are governed. That's what matters. As we come close to an end of this slides introduce us to certain questions or certain things that we can ponder over as we are revisiting throughout this particular course. In this particular themes are going to be something we are going to look at. And these are state versus market in development, colonial and post-colonial legacy, globalization in Africa, and the politics of what development policies. State versus market asks how many governments should direct development and how much should be left to private sector and market. Colonial and post-colonial legacy asks who or how past structures continue to shape present possibilities for us. Whilst globalization in Africa asks how trade, finance, investors, and global power relation affect Africa's development. The politics of development policies asks why some policies are adopted, why some fail, and why some are what resisted. So even when we move to later weeks or the later parts, such as African socialism, agriculture, political instability, or structural adjustment in all the parts that will be, you find each one of these topics being fully discussed for each part that we'll be doing for the subsequent parts that you'll be watching on the channel. These are the threads tied in to this course that as and when we go, you see this concept are what we'll be running through, what we'll be doing for this 8-part series on this particular course. You can ponder over these particular questions that we're looking at. So this question is supposed to help you in your thought process to be able to have these questions, ponder over them, and ask certain questions of yourself as we are almost done with this particular session. Now, why is political economy important for understanding Africa's development? Can economic growth occur without political stability? How did colonialism shape Africa's economy? A simple answer to the first one is that, as you're pondering over it, that political economy matters because development is not just technical, it is political. Because power influence policy, and policy what shapes what outcome. So for the second question, I'll say yes. Some growth can happen even in what stable setting, especially for a short period of time. But long-term development usually what requires a reasonable degree of what stability, institutional trust, and predictability. For the third question, what I'll say is that colonialism shaped Africa's economies by making many of them dependent on extraction. And the subsequent slides talk about that extraction, export, and external markets, whilst limiting industrial diversification and internal integration. If you are watching this particular video as a student or as a lover of the topic of political economy, pause and try to answer one of these questions in your own words before moving on, to be able to ponder over them where certain thoughts can flood your mind as you seek to understand this concept better. This second discussion questions goes deeper, and we're seeking that is Africa underdeveloped or developing? Explain your position. What role should the state play in development? Which African country best illustrate political economic analysis and why? And then my answer to the first question is that Africa is too diverse to describe it just as one label. Some African countries and sectors show important signs of progress, whilst other countries or others continue to face severe structural problems. So it is more accurate to speak of uneven development across the continent. Yeah. Which is not all these I'm talking about in terms of the discussions are the only ideas you can espouse in that. Yeah. On the role of the state, I would say that the state remains central. It has to provide infrastructure, public good, regulation, education, health, long-term coordination. But the exact balance between the states and the market will differ from country to country. Now, on the final question, there are many good answers. Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, Botswana all work well as long as you explain the country's economy structure or political choices and outcome clearly.
This slide gives some of the readings that deepens our understanding of this topic. If you want to acquaint yourself more with the literature, you can basically explore this reading or this recommended readings, and it's not limited to only these readings. There are a lot of readings you can actually acquaint yourself with, but you can acquaint yourself with this and ponder over these readings and read them to be able to be vested in the literature when it comes to political economy of Africa's independence. And these are ones I'll recommend for you.
My final slides over here gives us takeaways that we'll have to leave as we end in this particular session. That political economy helps us explain development by linking power to policies and policies to outcome. In other words, development does not happen so automatically. It depends on who holds power, what choices they make, how institutions shape those choices, and how those decisions affect real problems in the economy. So as we continue throughout this course, keep this in mind. Power, policies, and outcome. If you understand that particular link, you already have a strong foundation for everything that will follow in political economy of Africa since independence. Thank you for watching, and in this next session, we will build on this foundation as we move further into Africa's political economic history. Kindly subscribe, click on the YouTube channel to subscribe, or just a like or a comment on this particular video. And you can also send your topics or things you want us to discuss to kfosu0707 at gmail.com. Thank you for